in the July 29th, 2001 issue of U.S. News and World Report. In this issue, they stated that through DNA analysis, that scientifically it has been proven that civilization started in Africa.
Martin Bernal's 1987 book Black Athena is a controversial scholarly work. Bernal discusses the perception of the ancient Greeks in relation to their neighbors, the ancient Egyptians and Phoenicians. He believes they colonized ancient Greece and proposes that a change in the perception of history took place in the 18th century by Western scholars who deny any significant African influence in the development of ancient Greece.
You have to understand how history was actually codified up until this point. So when we understand how history has been codified, we then begin to see how words and themes and concepts, pictures, and the way that they put the puzzle of ancient history together.
This can't be, man. What? You know what this is?
What is it, Buddha?
It's the Book of Life.
Book of Life.
In the beginning, when man arrived on earth.
Interpretations that were based mostly in theology, as well as what we call pseudo-scholarship based on racism, pure, simple racism.
The black gods did leave their spacecraft, and they walked, and they named the beasts of the sea and the animals of the land.
Heavens.
So when we speak of ancient history, we are dealing with a schizophrenic mindset. We're dealing with the ancient history, or the ancient model, and we're dealing with Aryan history, which is the Aryan model.
And man in his blackness did walk the earth, making medicine.
Medicine?
They discovered time. These were all black people got down. Wait a minute. There ain't nothing in here about whitey. This is ours, Jack. Wait till the brothers hear this.
So, when we speak of ancient history, all of the documentations puts us as a Negroid people. And that the origins of civilization were essentially of a Negroid stock.
Oh, get this book out of here, baby. This tells me real tea. Check this out.
Control yourself, don't you see?
What you mean, Jack? Look at this here. Black people started the music and the brain surgery back in the year 3 BC.
Yes, of course, Bruno.
Man, they was getting down. This is it, brother.
Yes,
everybody gonna know about this. Listen, we can change the history. Civilization will be changed.
By all means.
Yeah, this is gonna be it.
History now became an argument to defend what Europeans interpreted of the data that was being accumulated. The Aryan model grew out of a German Enlightenment movement, a Germanic perception that all of the superior races, because they were white at that time and in charge or had conquered, their ancestors had conquered, that somehow these Germanic races that came from the north were the superior ones. And it was through that Aryan concept, I believe the man's name was Schlegel, he took the word Arya, which was an ancient Sanskrit word for noble one, and took that and ascribed a German word for Ari, which meant one of strength, and combined that together to become the Aryan. And that gave the perception to the rest of the world, and they promoted that very heavily.
Hispanic or Latino because, I don't know, no point in lying or holding back. Doesn't really matter.
I choose African American. Why? Is because that's mainly what I've always thought and known to be. So outside of that, I really couldn't tell you anything else truthfully.
Well, I consider myself white, but I don't know. It's kind of hard to put, you know. I wish they had a Brazilian box.
Usually I'll choose African American and white because I am black and white. Or sometimes, and if I'm not able to choose both, I'll either choose black because, I don't know, I just feel like black is more dominant when it comes to my genes.
Asian, because I feel like I fit best into Asian. I'm from the Middle East, so.
Well, normally I will choose Asian because first I'm from China. Geographically, you will say China belongs to Asian part.
Other, because I'm more than one race.
If there's an option to put Hispanic, I mark that, and I've stopped marking white Hispanic because I don't identify myself as white.
I consider myself Hispanic, you know, and I also speak Spanish. Sometimes I don't know what to put down if there's no Hispanic because I don't know what I am.
To be honest with you, I have chose African American, but like recently, like a few months back, I chose like a different ethnic because I thought that me picking like, you know, Pacific Islander or some other race, I thought that I might get called more faster for the job than picking African American.
African American because they never had the island category to choose from.
Being Dominican, where we don't have the same delineations, pretty much everybody's mulatto, which is a mix of black, white, Indian.
Normally I choose Asians, but I consider myself to be an original Indian, also known as Dravidian.
White, because I think that's what I fit in with best.
Black or African American, because I am black.
There's only one race, the human race. You know what I'm saying? But I mean, if you just technically look at it, like race is what? It's a competition. It's the whole reason why they got these categories. You know what I'm saying? They want my brother that's, you know, he's born from the rich port, aka Puerto Rico. All right. So you got somebody that's from Puerto Rico or Dominican Republic or Jamaica or New York, and we all look alike one way or another, but they got us calling ourselves different, so we see difference amongst ourselves. Willie Lynch, divide and conquer, however you want to explain it. We're calling ourselves different, so we're not going to unite. So in other words, we put ourselves in all these smaller categories. We ended up calling ourselves a minority, so we start thinking minor, thinking that we're smaller and less than, and we're not the original and the one that's in charge. So we're thinking minor, so we're a minority. And then you say, okay, these people are white. So you throw all these people from all these different places who don't even like each other, and you call them white, and you say that they're the rulers, and now they're thinking major, and they're the majority. No, we're the majority. Stop using Hispanic, stop using black, stop using African American, all these misnomers. Stop using Indian, stop using American Indian. All of us are the same.
People are more than 99.9% identical at the level of their DNA. Race is often defined as the divisions of humankind having distinct physical characteristics such as color of skin.
Now to scientists, that 0.6% is extremely valuable. But where do we see those differences? We see it in salient, observable characteristics: eye shape, nose, color of skin. The DNA says that there's no difference, that your body, your digestion, the way in which you give birth, all of those things are similar, regardless of culture and race. And now that we've moved away from race into ethnicity, these are just human-made forms to create dissension and disparity, and to make distinctions between one group over the other, and to give one group more status. And even within the group itself, you have these disparities.
In discussing the subject of racism, it is important to note the significance of melanin. Melanin is a natural element found in the universe and in most organisms. For humans, skin color ranges from the darkest brown to the lightest pinkish hues, and melanin is the primary determinant of producing skin color, and it is also responsible for the coloring of the eyes and follicles of the hair. It defends our skin by acting as a natural protectant against harmful UV rays. Studies show that melanin is also partially responsible for the formation of thought. Ultimately, melanin allowed humans to evolve, and without it, the sun becomes a threat to our skin and exposes us to various skin cancers. Some individual animals and humans have very little or no melanin in their bodies, a condition known as albinism. Over 90% of the human population, often classified as minorities, consist of people with melanin.
We have places like Sterfontein in South Africa, where they discovered some of the oldest fossils of Australopithecus africanus, and we do also have the oldest fossil that was discovered in Chad, Homo chadian, which is the oldest, which dates about 7 million years ago. So there's a lot of evidence that the cradle of humankind is here in Africa.
Dating over 90,000 years, the oldest modern human beings are known as the Khoisan people from southern Africa. From the Khoisan people gave rise to the Bantu, Cushitic, Australian Aborigines, and all the people of the world. This single branch of people is also responsible for all of the different facial features, hair types, and skin complexions seen today.
It's like looking at a composite model of every face from around the world. The eye shape of East Asians, the high cheekbones of Mongolians, the mid-brown skin that could turn darker or lighter.
Between 2.5 million years ago and 10,000 BCE, humans were primarily nomadic. Then learning to settle, plant, and grow food, small agricultural communities eventually lead to our earliest civilizations along the Nile River in Africa around 10,000 BCE. Humans reached a level of cultural sophistication with ideas about the world in which we live, a world with pharaohs and consorts.
So when we now move into the Nile Valley regions and we start talking about branching off into the ancient Indus Kush and the Nilotic people that came up through Ethiopia, we begin to start asking the question now, how could an Africoid people who, with all evidence that the Genome Project has now given to us, how could those people now turn white? Because the Egyptians, the so-called Egyptians, all gave mitochondrial evidence of being of a black stock. The ancient Kemites, of course, that became the central point where everyone from out of Africa, all of the southern regions of Africa, Kemet did not just happen. Kemet was the result of an amalgam of a lot of the great Monopotapan empires and all the different empires that came to a specific nexus. And it was there that they had all this great intelligent peoples from all over Africa converged on this point. That's why it became the treasure of every conqueror. I don't just deal with the history, we deal with the mystery. Because history is his story. Mystery is MY, my story. So when dealing with the mystery of our people, we're dealing with the true history, which is the mindset that created this incredible thing we call human civilization.
Kemet and Ethiopia are, of course, the oldest civilizations in these times. So it's natural that things are going to spring out of there and they're going to move forward, and people are going to copy and create and adapt due to their environment. So there's nothing new under the sun.
From within the heart of Africa and culminating in ancient Kemet, which we now misnomer as Egypt, humanity saw the formation and rise of culture, arts, science, astrology, law, medicine, architecture, and civilization. The development of storytelling, literature, and philosophy from within the heart of Africa would also become the basis for all of the world's religions.
So in saying who were the Sumerians, they were an African or a Nilotic peoples who came out of Kush or the southern parts and regions of Africa and migrated north. It became a conglomeration because they were like tribal regions. The Akkadians, the Assyrians, and all of them constituted a Africoid black civilizations that essentially through invasion began to become miscegenated. And it's in the miscegenation process that when Europeans began codifying them, they began giving them these European features.
By 2300 BCE, a Semitic-speaking Akkadian emperor named Sargon begins a series of conquests over Sumerian city-states, referred to as Shinar in the Bible. As a result of these conquests, the original culture of a dark-skinned Sumerian people would be absorbed by foreign invaders. The historical accounts of this part of the world would now become very vague. The Akkadians abandoned much of their own culture and absorbed vast amounts of Sumerian culture, including their religion, writing, government structure, literature, and law. Much like ancient Kemet, ancient Sumer would be a breathing ground for learning and cultural adaptation. Along with the Indus Valley, these civilizations all developed along major rivers by agricultural people with innovative ideas that would change the entire world.
To the east, we find the cousins of the ancient Kushites, which are the Dravidians. And of course, they created these incredible cities that had running water, inside plumbing, bathhouses, great meeting halls, and they were the cities of Harappa, what do you call the Harappa civilizations, and the Mohenjo-daro, and the Chanjaro, Lothal, which was the ancient port where everyone came to do trading. This was a monstrous, I mean, all of the areas of India had these incredible cities.
The Indian holy book, the Rig Veda, reveals that the Dasyus were one of the greatest enemies of the Vedic Aryans. The Dasyus were the original inhabitants of India, described as being noseless, dark-skinned, and repulsive by the invading Aryans.
It's in the Rig Veda that those Caucasoid who invaded began twisting the words and began to create what was known as the Varna system, which essentially created the upper class, the middle class, and then the lower class. They had a three-tiered system in ancient India at that time, in the Indus Valley. The kings and the queens were given, of course, the respect, but there were no slaves. So with that system that was in place, they took that over and regulated everyone to even below that class. And that Varna system created the system of the untouchables, which kicked out the original creators of the Indus Valley civilizations, and then took over what they did.
Upon his return to Greece, they gathered around and asked the historian Herodotus, "Tell us about this great land of the blacks called Ethiopia." He said, "There are two great Ethiopian nations, one in India and the other in Egypt."
Most people say that the Caucasoid invasion that came in from the north, the Turkish invasion that came into the north, that destroyed the Kushites, were essentially like those that destroyed the ancient Kemites, who were the Hyksos. The Hyksos, some people say, came in and invaded. Some said they infused their influence and slowly but surely began to politically edge out everyone because of what they began introducing to the people and gained favor that way, and then through a battle outside of Kemet came in and took over Kemet.
In the north, in southern Europe, the Indo-Europeans, who were herders of cattle and who were the domesticators of the horse and invented the war chariot, became people of tremendous military power. And the other were the people of the Syro-Arabian desert, who are the Semites, and these were herders of sheep and goats, and later the domesticators of the camel, which became then the war camel, and so forth and so on.
They changed and created this thing called the Middle East, which is supposedly estranging everyone from Africa. And then, because they found similarities in facial features like straightened noses, smaller lips, in Eastern Africans around the Somalian areas, they began attributing the Eastern Africans as someone different from the rest of Africa, the Sudanian Africans. And so now we began to have these Mediterranean type races and then giving them legitimacy over our history.
We find around the 6th millennium BC that the little settled communities begin to have walls. and the protection against these warrior people who were tough, fighting people and ruthless, whether they're Indo-European or Semites, the same story.
So now you began to see that the eastern part, based upon all of what they found about the facial features, and that was the big thing back in those days. The noses were the big thing. Your nose had to be straight, and as soon as they saw a straight nose, even if it didn't even look Caucasoid, it had to be Caucasoid. And even if they saw small lips, not realizing that in areas like Kenya and in Nigeria, where you had at least 350 different facial types that matched every type around the planet, right there in Africa, they then now began to exclude and use their facial topography as the evidence of the fact that these ancient civilizations were created by them. Kemet destroyed itself, essentially. It became eroded from inside. And it's at its weakest point that we see the incursion of all these Europeans and different factions, Assyrians and so forth, coming in to take the throne of ancient Kemet, because ancient Kemet essentially was on its way down by the time it was discovered.
In 525 BCE, the Persians conquered ancient Kemet. After a resurgence and intervals of independence for ancient Kemet, in 332 BCE, Alexander the Great conquers most of the ancient world. Reinventing itself after numerous foreign invasions, ancient Kemet is finally annexed by the Roman Empire in 30 BCE. It would be a few hundred years later, after the fall of the Roman Empire in 476 AD, that Europe would enter the Dark Ages until 1492. During this period, Black Moors from northern and western Africa occupy Spain and most of Europe.
Europe was basically backwards at that time, so that's why they were considered Dark Ages. No real education, no real culture, not much of anything.
Nothing that the European is projecting as his invention has been invented by him. It has all been assumed, even his classical music, when you're dealing with the Moors who came in after pushing out the Visigoths and establishing themselves, took in all of the peoples from all over Europe and began to raise their consciousness, began to teach them how to bathe, hygiene, all of the things that was necessary for a person to actually call themselves a legitimate human being.
The first device identified as a gun was a bamboo tube that used gunpowder to fire a spear in China around 1000 AD. By 1260 AD, invading Mongols introduced gunpowder to the Islamic world. And soon after, Europeans also learned about gunpowder and firearms, allowing them to conquer people as they navigated the world in search of land and resources.
To the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade this year, they didn't even have enough Indians in that shit. They had a bunch of pilgrims. When it came time for the Indians, they had 3 real Indians, and the rest was a bunch of Puerto Ricans with feathers in their hair. But fuck, shit, I know Puerto Ricans when I see them. You can't slip a Puerto Rican by me. That's not Pocahontas, that's Jennifer Lopez.
Instead of reaching India as he had intended, Christopher Columbus lands in the Bahamas archipelago and calls the natives mistakenly Indians. Across 2 continents and for over 4 centuries, countless tens of millions of Native Americans are relocated and killed by Europeans, and most of the survivors are forcibly converted into Christianity or Roman Catholicism. Many of the natives are known for refusing to submit and throwing the Bible up in the air. However, their cultures are abandoned and their languages are replaced by European languages, such as Spanish and English. In numerous cases, Native Americans are forced to move from their land. But as a result of countless agreements betrayed by Europeans, Native Americans would also attempt to defend their territories, whether it was against English settlers or Spanish conquistadors.
It was a proclamation of Thanksgiving, and it stated that all the rest of the colonies should follow their lead and go out and massacre the pagans and have a feast of Thanksgiving.
Now I wonder...
That is the original Thanksgiving.
Through the use of guns and diseases, Native Americans are wiped out by European settlers who believe they are destined to expand across the continent in what they call manifest destiny. Gradually, the Western world would learn about the Olmec and Mayan civilizations, which precedes Christianity by hundreds of years. Upon discovery in the late 19th century, Jose Melgar y Serrano described a colossal Olmec head found in Mexico as having Ethiopian features. Many other discoveries and research have come to shed light on an early African presence in the Americas. When Columbus and the Spanish would arrive in the Americas, the Mayan civilization was already in full decline, but evidence of art, science, and culture was very clear.
And that's what's happened on Indian reservations. They've kept us so isolated through the generations now that we're becoming facsimiles of ourselves. And not even that, we're facsimile of white people. We're facsimiles of the patriarchs.
When we hear, as we've heard throughout all our lives, no matter how old we are, that we are a country that stands for freedom, for rightness, for justice, for everyone, it simply doesn't apply to those who are not white. It just simply doesn't apply. And we were the most rapacious, aggressive, destructive, torturing, monstrous people who swept from one coast to the other, murdering.
For the last 500 years, this world has been ruled by European nationalism. And Europe has had one concept, and that concept is European dominance. It would be European dominance under the name of communism or socialism, under the name of fascism or capitalism, under the name of Christianity, but European dominance. And we have to realize that we live in a European-conceived intellectual universe.
Look at the Willie Lynch letter that talks about how you break a slave, especially a male slave. They would take the most prominent black male and hitch them to two horses and pull them apart so that the others knew to be docile. And this would be considered the literal psychological castration of the black male, because if he rose up against them, then this would be the consequence for rebellion.
You take away their ability to grow their own food. You take away their ability to learn. You take away their ability to make decisions about family. Everything that you're seeing happening today happened back then, but more on a violent level. Slavery didn't just end with the Emancipation Proclamation, and the Emancipation Proclamation didn't come to bear because white people suddenly had an epiphany. I woke up one morning, hey, I've been doing something wrong for the last 500 years. Let me free the slaves. Didn't happen like that.
When we see these changes, they're slow, they're subtle. Many young people today who were born in the 90s don't see race.
The Arabs took slavery and through their theological construct during the time of Muhammad began to use slavery as an institution of religion. When the Europeans came in, they took slavery and internationalized it.
40,000 years before the first British settlement in 1770, Australia was inhabited by indigenous Australians. From 1909 to the mid-1970s, over 100,000 Aboriginal children from Australia, known as the Stolen Generation, are removed from their parents by Christian ministries in an attempt to Europeanize the nation.
To the stolen generations, I say the following. As Prime Minister of Australia, I am sorry. On behalf of the Government of Australia, I am sorry.
I also offer, on behalf of the opposition, my unconditional support. As one people, we are sorry.
It never stops. Look at Palestine. The exact same methodology is being utilized there. The exact same methodology was used in Australia, in Canada, in Mexico, in the entire Western Hemisphere, and in Africa.
In 1948, apartheid becomes official in South Africa. New legislation classified inhabitants into 4 racial groups, including natives, whites, coloreds, and Asians.
Our policy is one which is called by an Afrikaans word, apartheid.
By the time apartheid was here, it was not only hitting the black people, it was hitting the darker skin of the people. We're talking Indian community, colored community, and the blacks themselves.
And I'm afraid that has been misunderstood so often. It could just as easily, and perhaps much better, be described as a policy of good neighborliness.
The fact that somebody doesn't like another person just because they look different is the reason for racism. And I think we still have a long way to go in eradicating that type of racism. And you see it locally, and I think it's just a phenomenon also that is international.
Accepting that there are differences between people. But while these differences exist, and you have to acknowledge them, at the same time, you can live together, aid one another, but that it can best be done when you act as good neighbors always do.
We actually don't have a place where we as black people can find our cultures, where we come from originally, where are we from, what happened during this century with black people and all of that, you know. You sort of like have some parts missing.
We don't believe, for instance, in the so-called guarantees for minority rights, because guaranteeing minority rights implies the recognition of portions of the community on a race basis. We believe that in our country there shall be no minority, there shall be no majority, there shall just be people.
On June 16, 1976, thousands of 13 to 16-year-old students from Soweto, South Africa, protest against being taught in European languages. Police would open fire, killing at least 618 of the students. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor during World War II, President Franklin D. Roosevelt orders over 117,000 people of Japanese descent, 2/3 of whom were native-born citizens of the United States, to be placed in war relocation camps. On Monday, August 6, 1945, at 8:15 a.m., the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima by an American B-29 bomber, directly killing an estimated 80,000 people. It would be the only use of the atomic bomb in world history.
There were 2 kinds of Negroes. There was that old house Negro and the field Negro. And the house Negro always looked out for his master. When the field Negroes got too much out of line, he held them back in check.
Do you think there are things white people should feel guilty about? All white people should feel guilty about?
Behaviors, white behaviors, yes. But I don't think you do those things because you're white. I think you do those things because you're ignorant.
The house Negro could afford to do that because he lived better than the field Negro. He ate better, he dressed better, and he lived in a better house. He lived right up next to his master in the attic.
So you're conditioned to do these things,
Absolutely.
to be racist?
Absolutely. And it works. The conditioning is working, has worked for a very long time.
And he loved his master more than his master loved himself. That's why he didn't want his master hurt. If the master got sick, he'd say, "What's the matter, boss? We sick?"
Do you think all white people are racist?
I think if you graduated from high school and you aren't a racist, you weren't listening. You should have gotten an F in social studies.
He never wanted his master's property threatened. And he was more defensive of it than the master was. That was the house Negro.
So that's a yes. All white people are racist.
We are conditioned to the myth of white superiority from the moment of our, in fact, before birth.
But then you had some field Negroes who lived in huts, had nothing to lose. They wore the worst kind of clothes, they ate the worst food, and they caught hell. They felt the sting of the lash. They hated their master. Oh, yes, they did. If the master got sick, they prayed that the master died. If the master's house caught a fire, they prayed for a strong wind to come along. This was the difference between the two. And today you still have house Negroes and field Negroes.
Over the last 500 years, Africans and Native Americans have been involved in numerous escapes, revolutions, and organized movements, often working with each other in order to survive.
If you go to South America, if you go to the Caribbean, if you go even into North Americas, these are just the people that refuse to be enslaved, okay? Because every man's right is to be free. So basically that's all the Maroons were. In Jamaica, they are still a small population. They're kind of dying out a little bit, the history. They even speak their own language there. It's really close to the West African languages that they speak in, like Nigeria and Ghana still, okay? So it's just the culture and the history of the people that didn't want to let it go.
Between 1791 and 1804, led by leaders such as Toussaint Louverture, a slave revolt in the French colony of Saint-Domingue culminates in the elimination of Napoleon's troops and slavery, which leads to the founding of the Haitian Republic. As a result of the Haitian Revolution, France sold the Louisiana Territory to the United States in order to financially recover from the loss of land, property, and slaves. Supported by the United States and England, France would demand $90 million from the Haitians, which is $12.7 billion today, forcing them to pay for their freedom. However, being the first and only successful slave revolution in the history of the world, the Haitian Revolution was influential in numerous slave rebellions in the United States and British colonies.
The Haitian people were basically more of an organized revolution where they were fighting back against that. Versus the Maroons in Jamaica, those people were typically just saying, hey, you know what? We're not even fighting with you. We're just leaving this. We're not even part of this structure. If you want to do your thing, you do your thing, but we're natural free people. This is where we are and this is what we're going to do. Now, if you invade us, of course, we're going to take, action that's necessary. So that's why, the British didn't really mess with them. They couldn't even really defeat them. At some point, they actually had to come to a treaty with the Maroons.
Do you think there's a color problem in this city?
Not really. Not the way it would be in, shall we say, Little Rock, as you would hear from the States, or maybe Upper Canada. Some people like colored people, and others don't. That's the same as some colored people like white people, and others don't. I think it's prejudice on both sides.
Didn't grow in you because we're in a white country predominantly, and anything different is something different. In that sense, they do discriminate.
Have you ever tried to go to a white barber? If you're happy with your Negro barbers, you don't need to go to a white barber.
Well, but Negroes, not nigger.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say nigger. I was saying Negro. If I was misunderstood, if I didn't come out clearly, I'm sorry.
It's more subtle now. It's not as flagrant as it used to be in some areas, but it is still an issue, and I think it's just something that has to be cycled out.
It's one of the biggest issues that people don't realize it. Poverty, the criminal justice system, all of it sucks. It's all based on race, on minorities.
I think when it is an issue, it's mostly because of how parents have taught their children, and they just go off of that instead of forming their own opinions.
I feel like race is an issue mainly because of the prejudice we are born with and we inherit from our family and members of our social groups, the people we hang out with.
The past 200 years, slavery, discrimination, from segregation, everything. I just believe it's still alive to this day.
I find myself making judgments about other people because I feel like a lot of people have a certain disposition about Americans or just people that live in America, even if they're not Americans, and they come here with that opinion and are just rude.
For me, it never happened like people trying to be racist based on where you're from and based on your skin color. So yeah, I don't think it's a big problem.
It is a huge issue, but we don't address it. It's called colorblind politics now. We don't want to talk about it. We say that, there is no racial issues going on, but it is. It's just, we call it by another name. There's tons of institutional racism going on.
It's even evident in when you're growing up in schools, you see children like, oh, I won't play with the darker girl because, the lighter girl looks cuter. And this is within the black culture. So of course it's still alive.
Well, it's everywhere. It's going to be, even if it's not out loud, people are thinking things in their head. It's just subconsciously, you're going to differentiate yourself with other people, whether, it's in a bad or good way. It's still there.
I definitely do think race is a big problem in this country. Even like, job discriminations everywhere you find it. It's a determining factor for, many different things. Whether we like it or not, it exists.
In 1921, we saw in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Black Wall Street. It was a thriving, prominent area in which not just businesses were thriving, there were huge financial growth where the dollar it would take a year for that dollar to leave that community. Nowadays, we see that the dollar leaves the black community every 15 minutes.
According to some, it's about protecting civilians. But some are convinced intervention in Libya is all about currency, specifically Gaddafi's plan to introduce the gold dinar, a single African currency made from gold, a true sharing of the wealth. In the months leading up to the military intervention, he called on African and Muslim nations to join together to create this new currency that would rival the dollar and euro. They would sell oil and other resources around the world only for gold dinars. It's an idea that would shift the economic balance of the world. Countries' wealth would depend on how much gold they have, not how many dollars they trade. And Libya has 144 tons of gold.
They will not allow economic development. They'll allow a few casinos, and that makes you falsely rich, but your values aren't improved because you're still a beggar, because gambling is nothing more than legal theft. So when you're still refusing welfare, whether it's a pittance from the government or some alleged wealth from the casino, it makes no difference. It doesn't change your disposition as a human being.
Black Wall Street came out of the necessity to use black businesses because we weren't allowed to use the white businesses. So we kept everything, our foods, we shopped at only black markets. Our education, we went to only black schools. All of these in a 6-block radius of Tulsa, Oklahoma, you found thriving black businesses.
It's uncovering these subtle aspects of racism. It's raising consciousness that we need to do, right?
Well, the new racism is denying racism.
We don't have an education system, we have an indoctrination system. And taking out who you are as relevant to anything on the planet, and then now putting you out in the world to try to function that way. It doesn't work, can't work. So slavery goes from the most brutal systems of repression into the most sublime.
Most of the education takes place in the living room. The living room. English is the last language, and it's the least expressive, which it is, ascertained by linguists of the world. Then anything you translate in English is a half-truth, at best, at best.
Somebody told a lie one day. They couched it in language. They made everything black, ugly, and evil. Look in your dictionary and see the synonyms of the word black.
Look at the terms black, colored, African American, because each generation defines itself differently, but the treatment doesn't change.
It's always something degrading and low and sinister. Look at the word white. It's always something pure, high, and clean.
See, prior to the mid to late 1600s in the colonies of what would become the United States, there was no such thing as the white race. Those of us of European descent did not refer to ourselves by that term really ever before then.
But I want to get the language right tonight.
Actual origin is Netgar, N-E-T-G-R, from pharaohs, to denote the new pharaoh, and it was for prominence. For Hispanics, the word was to denote color, but then it started being associated with color of skin, and there was no derogatory association with the name itself. But what we now see is that as of slavery, it would begin to be used negatively and for a certain type of person.
The slavery itself first comes through conquest, military conquest. And then the second and most important part of military conquest is the education system. You must put the education system into place so that conquest does not become the entire premise upon which you rule that people that you conquer, because they will find a way to go guerrilla and then essentially destroy you.
During slavery and the invasion of the Americas, Africans and natives would disguise their religious rituals and defenses. Capoeira, for example, is a Brazilian martial art that started by combining elements of dance and music in order for slaves to deceive slave masters during the 1500s. Following the Spanish conquest in 1521, the Spanish would destroy a temple of a Native American mother goddess outside Mexico City and build a chapel dedicated to the Virgin Mary on the site. Newly converted natives continued to come from afar to worship there, often addressing the Virgin Mary as their native mother goddess. During the 1600s, Voodoo was a religion in Haiti that was suppressed as Africans were converted into Christianity. But many devout followers replaced images of African gods with European Christian saints in order to continue following their own religion. By 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea was a key event in which the formation of the Christian Church by Northern Africans would now become focused and centralized in Europe. A council of bishops met and would agree upon a new interpretation for the Son of God and his relationship to God the Father. Arius, an African bishop of the Church of Alexandria, Egypt, and 118 other African bishops of the Christian Church would eventually disagree with Constantine's view of a Romanized Christianity filled with mysticism. They would escape for their lives into the mountains. This was a time when the Christian Church was moved from Africa and brought into its new home in Rome under Constantine. By the 2nd century AD, more than 1/3 of the Roman Senate was born in Africa.
Constantine decided that since all the North Africans they were trying to conquer were dominantly in that religion already, they needed, just like any other political construct, something to control the masses of the people. So basically that's where they came about. The Council of Nicene was formed, and they decided what was going to be in the Christian Bible that we, the 66 books that we hold today.
Because you notice in their little books, they hated Kemet. There were plagues on this, plagues on that. We were locked down. The Jews were locked down in Egypt and so forth. And we were brought out with Moses and the staff of life and all this other BS. Let me tell you something. The Red Sea was nothing but a big-ass puddle.
The original Jews, or Hebrew-speaking people, originated from Africa and migrated into Asia, where they would later culturally integrate with other tribes and people. Between 786 and 809 AD, under the pressure to choose between Christianity and Islam, a European king from Khazaria adopts the Afro-Asiatic religion of Judaism, from which Islam and Christianity both originate.
People here are called anti-Semitic. What is your response to that as an Israeli Jew?
Well, it's a trick. We always use it. When from Europe somebody is criticizing Israel, then we bring up the Holocaust. When in this country people are criticizing Israel, then they are anti-Semitic. And the organization is strong and has a lot of money.
And the Europeans, the white people who were there, had a reaction, a color reaction to the Semites that is no different than the reaction and the concern on the part of people who are white in this area of the world or any other area of the world to people who have the genetic capacity to produce color, who can genetically annihilate their position. And I think it's very, very important. Even though Dr. Shockley, I am convinced that Dr. Shockley believes that he is perhaps elevating science with all of his charts and all of his figures, but he doesn't understand the things that propel him as a white individual in a social system that has programmed him throughout his life and programmed large numbers of people like him to focus on the genetics of people of color in such a way as to destroy people of color.
By 90 AD, the Council of Jamnia was a key event in which the canon of the Hebrew Bible was finalized. Although the event is often questioned and debated, it is clear that elements from the Kabbalah and more ancient concepts like reincarnation are omitted from the Hebrew Bible in favor of a more linearized concept of time. In this way, time was no longer infinite. It would end, and there would be a judgment day for each person. In the ancient Kemetic science and in all non-Abrahamic religions, time was eternal, that is, without beginning or end. In Roman Latin, AD stands for Anno Domini, that is, the year of our Lord. BC, which is actually BCE, stands for before the Common Era. The majority of the world currently follows the Gregorian Christian calendar, which begins with the year 1 AD. The calendar downplays the BCE period, which covers over 5,000 years of indigenous peoples' history throughout the world.
Trying to tell somebody that their Quran was actually written for them so that the people would essentially have a construct around which to follow so that they can be more easily controlled? Can't tell them that. Because the myth of Islam is the greater selling point of Islam than the reality of Islam. Just like the myth of Christianity is the greater selling point than actually the truth about what Christianity is.
Some say we should go the Democratic way. Some say we should go the Republican way. We got to go the Christian way, you know. After all, we got to have the law. Somebody else has got to go the Islamic way. The idea is to go.
You automatically give validity to Islam and Christianity because the basic foundation is sound, upon which it was built. The premise upon which that is built is sound. So you can dovetail and stick flowers any place you want. It's still going to look good and sound good because the basic premise of all the religions came from out of an African perspective. And that ancient perspective, that perspective of ancient melanated peoples, diversifying the forces of the universe into what they call gods, anthropomorphizing them into facial features and bodies because the highest creation is man. So what else would man, as the interpreter of God on this level, do except interpret those forces as it is on herself? So it isn't that we were worshiping these entities, but we were recognizing them in ourselves when we gave them that.
And it's something internal that we always understood because in African culture we're always dealing with nature and the essence of creation. So they wanted to take it into something that was outside of you to make it more of a commodity, which is most of what Western civilization is about.
When you take away the fact that you are the one praying to yourself, that you are the God folded over onto yourself. You are God itself. But to take that premise away and say you can't be God, you can't be Jesus, you can't be that, that's how you estrange a person from the truth of themselves. And that's the basis of slavery. Religion is based in universal truths, elaborated with the context and constructs of some very devious people. Priesthood. The priesthood is responsible for the madness we see on the planet.
Because it was the Catholics, the Holy Roman Catholic Church, that invented this present-day school system that everybody uses all over the world, all patriarchal societies.
Look at religion now, you're dealing with something supernatural, you know. So supernatural means more than what? Nature, right? So it's extreme. So they're just taking the concept and taking it away from the people. So now you're thinking it's something that is unattainable by the normal man.
The one thing civilizations always do is to have a God as their supreme being. And that name is what's first destroyed and replaced. So gods are constantly being replaced by concepts and perceptions. Every civilization that's conquered, conquering civilization imposes their name on God. So now you as African people are going to church, and you being a conquered people, what are you doing? You're naming your God after your conqueror. You're naming your God after Islam and Allah and all that. These were not the names of your God. Unkulukulu. Amen. And at the end, you can tell, all of them say amen at the end. You can tell where it all came from.
Amen, I mean, all these are root constructs for, the Most High Creator. So that's why even now in Christianity, you see that they still use the word amen or amen even after prayer.
As an aspect of the one God in the cosmic order, Set, a rival deity of Osiris in ancient Kemet, is associated with the desert and storms. In later myths, he is also a god of the darkness and chaos, yet he represents a path to the afterlife. In ancient Persia, a religious philosopher called Zoroaster simplified the pantheon of early Iranian gods into two opposing forces. This led to the religion of Zoroastrianism, and the language found in the religion's holy book, the Avesta, is strikingly similar to that of the Aryan Sanskrit and the Holy Vedas from India. The indigenous Hindu god Shiva from the Indus Valley civilization is one of many deities. He is depicted as a destructive yet creative force who also represents a path to the afterlife. Heavily influenced by other cultures, the ancient Hebrew-speaking people and later Christians would also create two opposing forces with the concept of God, Satan. However, the Western concept of Set, or Satan, does not consider him as an aspect of God, but rather as a fallen angel, once known as Lucifer, that is, the light.
Sometimes you may be your own Satan, you may be your own devil. So they overstood these things, but these things were taken once again into some type of commodity. So you come to me, maybe I'll save you from this. Pay me enough money, I can show you the way to get to save you.
And if you do not understand how your day has been modeled by the oppressor, that your very subconscious thinking is actually part of the support mechanism that maintains your one down. If you don't know that, then I can't tell you how to be free, because you will always look at your reality as the true reality and not something you need to change. Consciousness of our people, knowing the basic constructs that brought them here as slaves, and we are now adopting their names and we're acting out their gods, and we're not going to do that anymore. There has to be a putting aside of all of that and coming back to the fundamental basis of who we are and what we are and how we became who we are. That history is already being revealed.
Who are you? You don't know. Don't tell me Negro, that's nothing. What were you before the white man named you a Negro?
Hey, what we want is the rules and the culture. What we want is the rules and the culture. What we want is the rules and the culture. What we want is the rules and the culture. We burn the Babylon, we burn the Batman, we burn the politician leading all the people wrong. So strap up your boots, this one for my troops. Weapons taken seal, till its caps are peeled. Enough money real, no business owe them feel. Emboss the 7 seals, now the truth revealed. Like your third eye, we moving through the times. With the beats and rhymes, Kundalini spine, elevate your mind. What we want is the rules and the culture. What we want is the rules and the culture. What we want is the rules and the culture. What we want is the rules and the culture. What we want.
I must tell the crew, black everything, the black truth. This is my story now, this is the fat kid. I take you back to the days of the pyramids. This ain't no ghost town, man, this is culture. And these are black things that might assault ya. And this is knowledge, bruh, now this is wisdom. And these are all black things from my kingdom. This is my black wife and my black child. And this is black soil that comes from the river now. This is the black king from the other side. Old Mex, South American or worldwide. And all the people and all the children. And in Australia, they disappearing.
And where were you? And what did you have?
Wait till the brothers hear this! So, when we speak of ancient history, most of all of the documentations puts us as a Negroid people. And that the origins of civilization were essentially of a Negroid stock. Oh, get this book out of here, baby! This tells me real tea! This yourself, control yourself, don't you see? What you mean, Jack? Look at this here! Black people started the music and the brain surgery back in the year 3 BC! Yes, of course, Bruno. Man, they was getting down! This is it, brother! Yes, everybody gonna know about this! This book. We can change the history. Civilization will be changed. Yeah, this is gonna be it. History now became an argument to defend what Europeans interpreted of the data that was being accumulated. The Aryan model grew out of a German Enlightenment movement, a Germanic perception that all of the superior races, because they were white at that time and in charge or had conquered, their ancestors had conquered, that somehow these Germanic races that came from the north were the superior ones. And it was through that Aryan concept, I believe the man's name was Schlegel. He took the word Arya, which was an ancient Sanskrit word for noble one, and took that and ascribed a German word for Ari, which meant one of strength, and combined that together to become the Aryan. And that gave the perception to the rest of the world, and they promoted that very heavily.
Hispanic or Latino, because, I don't know, no point in lying or holding back. It doesn't really matter.
I choose African American. Why? Is because that's mainly what I've always thought and known to be. So outside of that, I really couldn't tell you anything else truthfully.
Well, I consider myself white, but I don't know. It's kind of hard to put, you know. I wish they had a Brazilian box.
Usually I'll choose African American and white because I am black and white. Or sometimes, if I'm not able to choose both, I'll either choose black because, I don't know, I just feel like black is more dominant when it comes to my genes.
Asian, because I feel like I fit best into Asian. I'm from the Middle East, so.
Well, normally I will choose Asian because first I'm from China. Geographically, you will say China belongs to Asian part.
Other, because I'm more than one race.
If there's an option to put Hispanic, I mark that, and I've stopped marking white Hispanic because I don't identify myself as white.
I consider myself Hispanic, you know, and I also speak Spanish. And sometimes I don't know what to put down if there's no Hispanic because I don't know what I am.
Honest with you, I have chose African American, but like recently, like a few months back, I chose like a different ethnic because I thought that me picking like, you know, Pacific Islander or some other race, I think I thought that I might get called more faster for the job than picking African American.
African American because they never had the island category to choose from.
Being Dominican, where we don't have the same delineations, pretty much everybody's mulatto, which is a mix of black, white, Indian.
Normally I choose Asians, but I consider myself to be an original Indian, also known as Dravidian.
White, because I think that's what I fit in with best.
Black, or African American, because I am black.
There's only one race, the human race. You know what I'm saying? But I mean, if you just technically look at it, like race is what? It's a competition. It's the whole reason why they got these categories. You know what I'm saying? They want my brother that's, you know, he's born from the rich port, aka Puerto Rico. All right. So you got somebody that's from Puerto Rico or Dominican Republic, or Jamaica, or New York. And we all look alike one way or another, but they got us calling ourselves different, so we see difference amongst ourselves. Willie Lynch, divide and conquer, however you want to explain it. We're calling ourselves different, so we're not going to unite. So in other words, we put ourselves in all these
relation to their neighbors, the ancient Egyptians and Phoenicians. He believes they colonized ancient Greece and proposes that a change in the perception of history took place in the 18th century by Western scholars who deny any significant African influence in the development of ancient Greece.
You have to understand how history was actually codified up until this point. So when we understand how history has been codified, we then begin to see how words and themes and concepts, pictures, and the way that they put the puzzle of ancient history together.
This can't be, man. What? You know what this is? What is it, Buddha? It's the Book of Life. Book of Life. In the beginning, when man arrived on earth.
Interpretations that were based mostly in theology, as well as what we call pseudo-scholarship based on racism, pure, simple racism.
The black gods did leave their spacecraft, and they walked, and they named the beasts of the sea and the animals of the land.
So when we speak of ancient history, we are dealing with a schizophrenic mindset. We're dealing with the ancient history, or the ancient model, and we're dealing with Aryan history, which is the Aryan model.
And man in his blackness did walk the earth, making medicine. Medicine? They discovered time. These were all black people got down. Wait a minute. This ain't nothing in here about whitey. This is ours, Jack.
In the July 29th, 2001 issue of U.S. News and World Report. In this issue, they stated that through DNA analysis, that scientifically it has been proven that civilization started in Africa.
Martin Bernal's 1987 book Black Athena is a controversial scholarly work. Bernal discusses the perception of the ancient Greeks in